I wanted my old self back and I couldn't find her.
Yep.
And I was so incredibly sad for no reason. Nothing had changed in my life. There was no circumstance that would make me be sad. That was scarier than anything I think I've ever experienced, and also gave me such immeasurable compassion for people who struggle with that a lot. This is your Kick-Ass Life podcast, episode number 316.
This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast with Andrea Owen, a no BS guide to self-help and badassery. Because ladies, let's face it, life's too short for it to not kick ass. And here's your host, the girl who serves it up straight with a side of crazy, Andrea Owen.
Hey there, ass kickers. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am so glad that you're here. So because it is sort of the new year, I mean, depending on when you're listening to this, but it's the new year for me. We're in our very first week of January. Actually, this is kind of my first day back. Over the weekend, I rearranged completely the furniture in my office. So my office is in a bonus room of our house. It's not technically a bedroom, but I guess they call this a frog room. Finished room over garage. I think that's what it stands for. And it doubles as our guest bedroom because it is a rather large room. So it's felt a little bit awkward to me. It's like, is it a bedroom? Is it my office? It's both. But I feel brand new because I turned everything around. And by the way, my husband's injured. So I moved all of the furniture by myself, which I felt like a righteous badass doing that. And I didn't get hurt. So that's amazing. But now I look out the window again and the lighting is great. It's amazing how just a little tiny change in geography can change your perspective and make you feel so brand new. And speaking of brand new, have you had a chance to listen to Not Another Self-Help podcast? It is the love child of Amy Smith over at the Joy Junkie and me. Wait, and I always get that confused. At any rate, we are doing a podcast together. It's called Not Another Self-Help Podcast, where it is a little bit of a departure from the things I do over here. It's just she and I. It's no guests yet. We haven't brought any on, but we have a little system over there. We have segments called Middle-Aged Conversations. This is the part where we tell you what to do. And in that segment, we answer your questions. You all have such great personal development questions. There are officially 2 episodes out right now as of, what is today, January 12th or 13th or whatever it is. But we have 8 episodes in this particular season, in our inaugural season. A new one drops every Friday. I'm really excited for you to listen to episode 5. So that's going to come out, in the very last week of January, early February, where I don't even want to tell you. It's kind of gross. So we talk about, I don't think an episode passes where we don't talk about something happening to the body, whether it's periods or period poop or something going on with the labia or just funny, gross things that I so very rarely talk about over here. We have a great old time over there. So head on over to notanotherpod.com or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you grab your podcasts. We would love for you to listen and rate and review to see if we are going to do another season going forward. All right, I'm excited to bring you this episode because it's been a minute since I have brought you a conversation about shit that matters with unqualified people. And it's not because I didn't want to. It's just that I didn't really have a topic. And I thought about you all, and I know that a lot of you struggle with anxiety, and I know many of you also struggle with depression or know someone that does. And I have struggled with it myself, and I brought on my dear friend, Kate Anthony, again, who's been on other episodes as an expert, as well as conversations about shit that matters with unqualified people as a non-expert. I will put those links in the show notes. Kate is a life coach. She will tell you a little bit about what she does as we start the episode. And for those of you that might be new to these particular episodes, what I like to do is have candid conversations with my real life friends about stuff that happens. We come on these episodes not as experts, not about here, let us tell you the solution or the healing, the tips and tools around the topic. We come on as just two women, two friends having a conversation about an important topic in our lives. So this one we are talking about anxiety and depression. We do a little bit go into some strategies that we employ in our own self-care regimens, but full disclaimer, we are not doctors. We are not licensed professionals around this particular topic. We're merely giving you our experience and how we have navigated what it looks like in our life. So without further ado, here is my conversation about shit that matters with unqualified people with Kate. Kate Anthony, you're back.
I'm so happy to be back.
I am so glad that you're here. And for those people who are new to Kate,
What?
you are, I know, living under a rock maybe. Well, I mentioned in the introduction that we've done a few other of these episodes. Those are in the show notes. And I'm going to let you tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh,
professionally.
Wow. Okay. So professionally, yeah, I'm a divorce and discernment coach. I help women decide whether to stay in or leave their marriages. And then I help them through if there's if they decide to go. I'm also a divorce coach, and I help women through that process from the psycho-emotional perspective. I also have a podcast called the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, and that's it. I'm a super happily divorced mom of a 14-year-old, and I've been divorced for 10 years, and that's about it, I guess, right?
And you come on my podcast because you are my close personal friend and colleague, and we have these conversations that are fun.
Yeah. Yes.
This one I don't know if it's going to be as fun because
so fun.
It's so hilarious. And it's one that I know that my listeners are going to be interested in because so many of my audience struggles with anxiety. And I think many of them with depression. And if they don't, they probably know someone that does.
Yes. Oh God. Yes. How do you not? Right. I mean, it's like alcoholism. How do you
you can't throw a rock without, hitting somebody that struggles with it in some way or another.
Exactly.
Well, where I want to start is, and what's interesting is that I don't think, I know that you've struggled in these realms and I've seen you walk through it over the last years that I've known you, but I don't know your childhood around it. And so tell me, we'll both kind of share what our experiences have been with anxiety and depression growing up. So what were yours? When did you know?
Well, to be honest, Andrea, I didn't know till I was a grown up. I think it's it was a frog in water kind of thing where I didn't know, and I was raised by a single mom. My dad was out of the picture he was in and out, for most of my life. And my mom, I think, suffers from crippling anxiety, but never has been treated. She's never acknowledged that she's anxious. And I'll say things to her now where I'm like, Mom, you're so anxious. I'm not anxious. I'm not, I'm just, she has panic attacks. She's
just British.
She's just British. Exactly. Exactly. She's just British. The woman doesn't sleep. She perseverates on things so badly that she doesn't sleep. And I'm like, that's anxiety.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know it. And I think that was similar to me. One of my earliest memories was actually not until college, where my best friend from college said to me at one point, she was talking about my anxiety. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I don't have anxiety. And she was like, Katie, the way that you twiddle your ring all the time and chew the side of your mouth, I chew the inside of my mouth. She's like, those are anxious behaviors. And I was like, what? And I think because I was raised with people never talking about this and it never being a conversation, I just didn't know. I didn't, and I feel like it's the same with my mom, where I just don't think that. I think I just didn't identify it as such.
Okay,
but I think looking back, I absolutely had it.
So it sounds like it was maybe with both of you, what is now referred to as high functioning anxiety.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Where for some people it's crippling. And to me, that's like to the point where they can't work. They many times can't drive. They have regular panic attacks. And I think it can ebb and flow in people's lives. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, let me back up even more so than my own experience. But my dad got sober when I was 18. He announced, well, first my parents announced their divorce. My mom actually did. She left about 5 minutes after I graduated from high school, which was a shock to me. Then a couple of months later, my dad announced that he was checking himself into rehab, like a inpatient treatment center. I'm like, for what?
Yeah.
And he said for alcoholism, which was super weird to me. I thought everybody's dad just like drank 10 beers a night.
I don't know if we've ever talked about this, because my dad got sober at the exact same time when I was 18. And it was the same thing. He was like, I've been sober for, he came and told me that he'd been sober for a period of time. And I was like, what?
Why?
I was like, I thought you just like did drugs. What do you mean alcohol? Never mind
which drugs are fine.
Right. And like, never mind the fact that I literally spent every waking minute that I was with my father in his care, I was in a bar.
Oh yeah. You told me about that. They had like the car seat at the bar, like at the foot of the bar. Yeah. No, mine wasn't like that. My dad was just an at home. Well, my parents had an active social life too. And my mom never drank, but my dad was the one but it was normal. Like everybody's parents were doing it. Right. It was just parties. It was house parties and parties at the tennis courts. And it was completely normal. I never even saw my dad drunk. My dad never even raised his voice. I don't think ever in my life did I hear my dad raise his voice, drunk or sober. He just was more of an introverted type of guy. Right. And now, years and years later, I know that he drank to help the trauma that he had that was never addressed, as well as his own anxiety and insecurities and fears, which is why so many people drink. But yeah, he went away to an inpatient treatment center that was local, and it was super weird to me. And then he got sober. And then after that was when his depression and anxiety, I think, came in full bloom.
Right.
And by full bloom, I mean more of an explosion. And I hadn't had any experience with that at all. We didn't know anyone. The only time I had ever heard it spoken about was my parents had these really good friends that were tennis friends of theirs. And it was actually my dad's best friend. And this man's wife didn't play tennis, but she was always there and definitely in the friendship circle. So my dad came home one day, and I remember, it's so funny how like when we're little, we think our houses are so much bigger than they really are. I'm sure they were only like 10 feet away from me down the hallway, but it seemed like such a long hallway. And my mom was in the doorway, and my dad walked in, and he said to my mom, and he said, Barb killed herself. She shot herself, and Mark found her. Mark was their son. Mark was also my tennis teacher, and he was probably like 20. And so, yeah, he found his mother, and it was my dad's best friend's wife. And my dad like collapsed in my mom's arms crying. It was the first time I'd ever seen my father cry. First time I had ever known of anyone to take their own life. And also, in the days following, I had probably asked questions or heard them talking about it. She had depression and was on Prozac, which at the time, this was probably the mid 80s.
Right. That was like the old drug.
That was it. And I think it was still, they were still trying to figure it out.
Right. Sure.
And
it was like Prozac or lithium.
Right. And
that was it.
So that was my only experience in knowing what that was. So I was terrified of depression and people that had to be on medication. That was all that I thought that it was.
Right.
And when my dad, I don't remember how I found out, if it was from him or if it was he was still speaking to my mom. And that's how I found out that his anxiety and depression were clinical at that point when my dad got sober. I remember judging him so much and just being like, why doesn't it seemed like a moral failing, like not just the alcoholism, and just such shame on me and my family. Not, like I didn't have a lot of friends that were divorced, had divorced parents. So that coupled with the fact that my dad was an alcoholic, and then now this depression, anxiety bullshit, like I had such shame around it, so much judgment to him, and not understanding what it was. Like I thought he could control that.
Right.
Like, why don't you just get your shit together?
Yep.
And then I got a phone call from him, and it had been a couple of weeks, but he told me, maybe we met for coffee, I can't remember, but he told me that he had a panic attack in the middle of an intersection while driving, had to open the car door and was vomiting.
Oh my God.
And I remember feeling so bad for him and just imagining him there. My dad was a real estate agent, like just in his suit, like trying to like go show a home or something. And it was the juxtaposition of, on one hand, feeling so heartbroken for him that my dad was sick. And then on the other hand, my dad had fallen off of his white horse.
Yes.
He had always been, I mean, I thought that man hung the moon. And to see him human, it was so confusing, and still in a lot of judgment, still in a lot of shame and fear. And that really was like my introduction to depression and anxiety. Very misunderstood.
Yep.
And it wasn't until about 8 years later that I walked into my own.
And it's so much for like a kid, for
a teenager,
for a teenager to like hold all of that, right? From divorce to alcoholism to, it's like the curtains being ripped back on so much of life's realities all at one time. And
we didn't talk about hard things.
Right. Exactly. I remember when I was a kid, my grandma, she was, we called her at the time, a hypochondriac. There's always something wrong with her. She was always at the doctor. And one of my earliest memories of her is her taking me over to her bedside table stand, and she opened the top drawer, and it was just a sea of amber bottles, just a sea of pill bottles. And from like front to back. And she took me and showed me, and she said, don't ever touch anything in this drawer. They might look like candy, but they're poison. And I mean, I think she told me they were poisonous, and I was like, but you take them, anyway. And so my earliest memories of my grandma are, constantly going to the doctor, everyone like in the family calling her a hypochondriac. And what I'm noticing now, like in hindsight and retrospect, is my grandmother, and this is my dad's mom.
Okay.
She was a refugee. She escaped.
Wow.
Yeah. She escaped from Russia at a very young, when she was like 8 years old, on a refugee boat. She made her way across Eastern Europe into Western Europe to the United States. And that I think my grandmother had a tremendous amount of anxiety. I think all of her stuff, she had IBS. So she had like irritable bowel syndrome. She had like all these things that now I think we would look at and be like, she had anxiety and she had trauma.
Yeah.
She had like untreated trauma and anxiety. And I think, that stuff is genetic. We now know that trauma is passed down through generations. And I just think there was a ton of that in my family on all sides. On all sides.
Yeah. I think the vast majority, if not all families, especially when it was so difficult, like that is a long ass way to come over on a boat. It's not like it was a Disney cruise ship that she was on coming over from Russia.
No.
Wow. So yeah, she probably, and what's interesting too, is I think back then the men just couldn't talk about it at all.
Right.
And they didn't. That's probably why a lot of them drank or ran around or whatever. And then the women, if they did talk about it and express it, it was known as hysteria. And a lot of them were committed.
Right. So you just shove.
Or electroshock therapy. That's happened to my grandmother.
Yeah. Yep.
For her depression. I'm curious about because you said that it wasn't until you were an adult did you sort of figure out that your anxiety might be more than just like a little bit of worrying. And then also, when did depression kind of invite itself into your home?
Did it bang down the doors? And
right. Maybe it did kick down the door.
Well, it really did. And I do think, again, in hindsight, being 2020, I think I was really depressed as a teenager. I think I had tons of depression and anxiety as a teenager, but I just didn't. I also had extreme hormonal imbalances. So I was, super cuckoo. And I went on the pill when I was 16, and that really helped. But I think,
I think it was when I got divorced that I finally was able to put words to it. And I remember after my divorce, and I was like, I was pretty happy to get divorced, but there was this weird thing that was happening where I was like lying on my couch and I was unable to move. And I had that, classic no motivation. And I also at the same time was having this really strong feeling in my solar plexus where it was like a wrench, like a knife just turning in my solar plexus. Like it was like a screw, and I couldn't breathe past it. And I was like having so much trouble breathing. And I was also having this feeling of complete lethargy and just unable to motivate to do anything. And I went to my doctor for my depression. And I was like, I think I'm depressed. And well, actually the very first time it happened was when I was postpartum. That was the first time. And so I had postpartum depression. And at my 2-week checkup, my doctor was like, how are you doing? And I immediately burst into tears. And she was like, fill this prescription downstairs, take one immediately. And that was my first experience with going on medication. And it changed me on a dime, like on a dime. And I got through that. And then I was like, okay, now I can go off of this because I'm not,
because that's fun.
What, going off or what?
Getting off medication.
I was on such a because of my sensitivities. I was on a pediatric dose. It was actually okay.
Oh, okay.
And so then, I went to my doctor after that. So then, this was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, 5 years later. And I went and I was like, about my depression. I was like, I think I need to go back on medication for depression. I'm feeling really off. And again, like I immediately start like just sobbing. And by the way, I was in therapy the whole time. And I kept telling my therapist about this feeling that I couldn't breathe. She never identified it. And so then
to me, that's like a telltale sign of anxiety.
Well, you'd think, right? But I was still completely clueless, right? And so then my doctor said, okay, so that's definitely depression. He goes, what about anxiety? And I was like, wait, you mean that feeling that like I have this thing and it feels like, and I described it to him and he was like, yeah.
Yeah.
He was like, that's anxiety. And I was like, oh, because I guess I always thought that anxiety was like, I didn't have perseverating thoughts, right? So I thought it was intrusive thoughts. I thought it was perseverating thoughts. I thought it was a mental thing. And then if it was physical, I thought it was like rapid heartbeat, like fear that was coming out of the thoughts. And I didn't
know any of that. Like you had way more information than I did. Because this was before, and I'm assuming, I don't know when that all happened for you, but when my dad got diagnosed, there was no Google. So I thought anxiety was just like chronic worry.
Yes,
and I was like, well, you can just knock that off.
Right, exactly. That's kind of what I thought it was too, which is what I meant, like by the thoughts, like worrying is thoughts, right? It's like, it's in your head, it's not in your body. And if it is, it's because like you have like, your heartbeat goes up because you're worrying, right? That's, exactly what I thought it was. And he was like, no, like you're physical, you're manifesting it physically. That's anxiety. And I was like, that was like, I was like, what? And I had no idea. And then I started to look back and I was like, oh, I've had this, that feeling was new. That feeling came along with my divorce, but and I still have questions, like I still have many questions, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting that you knew more about it than I did. And mine really started to manifest. I think that I had like a low-grade anxiety for a long time, but just thought like, it's just my personality. I'm just high-strung and jittery. That's just how I am, like a little terrier. And then when mine was situational, when I was in a really bad place in my former relationship, my long one with my ex-husband, there was a point where I remember I was on the phone with my best friend Shelby, and I got off the phone with her and I was telling her something that was going on. Who knows what it was at the time, whatever the disruption du jour was with him and I got off the phone with her and I was like, I'm going to be sick. And I was dry heaving And I didn't throw up, but I was dry heaving for a couple of minutes. And then my armpits started tingling. And then it went all the way down into my arms, into my pinkies. And then the rest of my fingers started tingling. And I was like, oh my God. And my heart was racing. And I'm like, am I dying? Like, what the fuck is this?
Oh my God.
So then it subsided eventually. And then it happened again. And I went to my doctor and I broke down in the room, and she gave me this clipboard and had me fill out this paper, and it's the questionnaire. And I filled it out, crying the whole time, handed it back to her. She scored it, and it came back so my official diagnosis was severe generalized anxiety disorder and mild panic disorder. And she was like, I think you need to be put on meds. And, because when she found out like how long it's been happening and the progression of it, and I felt just betrayed by my own body.
Yeah.
And I did not want to be on medication. I thought it was like this moral failing that had happened. I was angry with my dad. I was angry I just felt like there was something wrong with me. Like I was broken. Like, how can I not fix this? How can I not figure this out? Like I'm a fairly smart girl at that point. And I was 20, I think I was 26, and I went on medication, and it changed my life.
Yep.
I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Is this how other people walk around?
Right.
It was unbelievable how it changed everything. Yeah. And then what happened with me, I didn't know this. And I asked my doctor why she didn't tell me. And she's like, we don't like to tell people all the possible side effects because people are anxious. And so I got orgasm dysfunction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
When you literally can't.
You can't.
When you literally can't.
And
yeah. Yep.
And you are at the point of your sexual encounter where you are on the cusp of having an orgasm, and you stay there.
Yep.
And you can't get a beat drop. Like, and it was so frustrating. And then it was scary. I'm like, is my clit broken? Like,
I had the same thing. Okay. So since we're going there. So I had the same thing when that last time.
I did not expect to talk about
I know.
this.
Here we go.
It was a big part of it. It sucked.
It did suck. And that was the last medication I was on when I was that time when my doctor was like, yes, you have anxiety and depression, and I'm going to put you on meds. So that was that period. So I've gone off and on a number of times in my life. And at that point, I had that. I have a Hitachi magic wand.
Okay.
So
yes,
that is, for those who don't know, I have like the old school Hitachi magic wand. This thing plugs.
I was just about to say, is the one that plugs into the wall?
It fucking plugs in.
Andrea. It's like from 1980.
Yeah. It's from way before that, I think. But yes, this thing is like industrial. It is humongous, and it plugs in, and it is like an industrial strength vibrator. And I would be like grinding that thing on my clit.
Hurt yourself.
I was, no, because I couldn't feel anything. And I was like, oh no, did I can you overstimulate it? Can I
oh my God.
First of all, I thought I broke it with overuse.
Broke the Hitachi magic wand?
No, that I broke my clit.
Right, me too.
Broken the nerve endings. And so I was never going to have an orgasm ever again. And then I would take this thing and I would be grinding it, come on.
Yeah.
And
it was awful.
And it was, thank God, it was the meds. And
it took me a long time to put it together that it could be the meds. Oh, and then I asked my doctor, and she said, yeah, it's from the medication that you're on. It's I don't remember if it's a common side effect, but it is a side effect, could be a side effect. And I think her solution was to put me on an additional medication to counter effect that side effect. Oh. And I didn't want to. And I can't remember if I declined at first or what happened, but I decided on my own accord. So we went on our honeymoon. We got married, went on our honeymoon, and I was like, I'm not having this sexual dysfunction thing while I'm on my honeymoon. Right. And I went cold turkey, not knowing. Again, this was 2003. Oh. So this was before Google. God. I had no forewarning, don't just go cold turkey on your SSRI. It will mess with you. So I did. And we were in Hawaii. And I was like on day 2 of not taking it. We were on a hike and I slipped in some mud because it's rainy in Hawaii.
Mhm.
I slipped on some mud and slid a little bit down and I got mud on my shorts and I started crying and I had like a full on fucking meltdown because I got mud on my shorts. And so later, my husband at the time said, you know, when I had calmed down, I took my meds again. It was all fine. And he said, I was holding on to you so tight because I didn't really realize it at the time. We were standing like on a cliff.
Oh, God.
He said,
oh my God.
I thought you were going to throw yourself over.
Oh.
I've never seen you that hysterical before. You were like out of your mind.
Oh my God.
And I think also because it was kind of irrational, like it was just a little bit of mud, but I was not in a very good mental state at all. So don't do that. Like, please, people.
And I want to say, I just want to point this out, right? That we're specifically not naming the medication. I feel like we should just say that we're not naming the medication that we're on, or that we were on, because everyone is so different. And the thing that I've learned about this is that, and I've also learned this through having a child with very severe ADHD and going through, as you know, Andrea, like the tortures of the damned with medication for him. Brain science is amazing in that we know there are different firing receptors, connectors, like all of these things that could possibly be wrong with the brain that can cause depression and anxiety. And there's a different medication for everything. There's so many different kinds of medications that do different things with the brain. The problem is that brain science is not caught up with that diagnostically. So it's all trial and error. And everyone is different and everyone has a different. So I just want to be responsible in this conversation.
And again, my diagnosis came in 2001. So it was a long time ago. They've come a long way with medications. And I will just say for the record, I did end up taking the additional medication and it fixed my clit. Which it wasn't my clit, it was my brain. It was something was going on with the serotonin and the dopamine. I have no idea that was causing the orgasm dysfunction, and it got fixed. I met a woman who ended up being a really good friend of mine, and we bonded over our anxiety disorders, and we were on the same medication. And I asked her, I remember leaning over the table and I kind of like hushed voice, and I said, does this ever happen to you? If you're late taking your medication or you accidentally skip a dose, does your brain kind of feel like it does this weird? And the way I described it is like an old film reel. And you know, sometimes it skips. And what is it called?
Well, it's like a glitch.
Yeah. And we called it isms because we didn't have a name for it. And I've never had a seizure before, so I don't know what it feels like, but I would guess that was sort of like what it was. And I would say it's almost like a micro seizure that I feel like I'm having in my brain. And she's like, yeah, that totally happens to me.
You know, it's so funny. I've never had it happen to me, but I had a friend who took himself off of his medication, and I think he might have done it cold turkey too, or he was tapering, but that was a side effect. And I was like, you need to call your doctor. Like, this is not okay. He was having it multiple times a day.
It's scary.
Apparently it's a very common side effect of going off and tapering off. And
my heart goes out to people. Like, I would never want to experience that again because I haven't been on medication. When I got pregnant with Colton, I think is when, and interestingly enough, when I had him, I had severe postpartum anxiety that went unaddressed. It was so bad. I remember crying, being convinced that somebody was going to come in our house and steal him. Like, I was crying to my mom, and I remember my mom looking over at Jason. And you know how like you can tell when I had that moment of like, oh, I am like bona fide crazy.
I'm the crazy
right now
person.
based on the look that my mom just gave my husband or my boyfriend at the time. Yeah. And it was so bad. And I couldn't drive. I was having panic attacks in the car with him in the backseat, with my son in the backseat.
Oh my God.
And it wasn't as bad with Sydney. It was way, way, way better with her. And I think it was due to a lot of the stress that I had going on at that time in my life anyway. But I haven't been on medication since I found out I was pregnant with him. So that's been since early 2007. And it's reduced a lot. And I think a lot of it is based on the fact that I got sober and also doing my own work. And so it's very few and far between now that I have bouts of anxiety where I just wake up with it for no apparent reason. And we can talk about that in a minute because I'm curious like how you manage your own.
Yep.
But you're still on meds, aren't you?
Oh, hell yes. And when I was on the depression and anxiety combined medication a few years ago, that one time when I went to my doctor and he was like, that's anxiety. I ended up going up in my dose at one point, and I ended up having suicidal ideation, which is a common side effect if you're on too high a dose. Like in some medication, if you're on the wrong medication, it can cause that. Yeah. And I think in hindsight right now, what I realize is that I was just on too high a dose. And it was the wrong medication for me. But it was really scary because I will tell you that if I did not have a child, I may not still be here. So it was very scary because I've never been suicidal, but there was the depths of despair that I've never quite known. And I was somehow my brain was convincing me that, I really, everything would be better if I was not here. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that kept me was my son. And as soon as I got off the medication, it completely stopped. And you know what's really funny about this, though? I will tell you. It's not funny at all. But at the time, I thought that it was the combination of drinking, because I was drinking while I was on this medication. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was the combination of drinking and my medication that was causing the suicidal ideation. And no lie, I went off my medication because I would rather have kept my wine than my medicine.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I know. I really didn't really think about, I mean, I remember having a thought, but I hadn't really thought about it now, like in sobriety. I hadn't really thought about that, but like, yeah. So that's what I did. I was like, I either have to quit drinking or go off my medication.
Which is worse. Yeah.
So I went off my medication, which actually, by the way, I think saved my life. Mm-hmm. Actually, because I don't think it was that I was drinking. I do think it was because I was on a too high of a dose of the wrong medication. So maybe at that time my drinking saved my life. It's a little messed up, a little twisted.
Wow.
And so I went off, and then it was another, 4 or 5 years and it was like a year and a half ago that I went, or maybe coming up on 2 years, that I was going in for my general meeting, my physical, what's that called?
Yeah. Checkup.
My general meeting. My checkup.
What?
My menopausal brain doesn't work anymore. This is so sad. So I go in for my checkup, and the like 22-year-old nurse's assistant comes in to do the like intake, the normal intake. And this poor girl starts doing the general screening questions for depression.
For your general meeting. Mm-hmm.
For my general meeting. Mm-hmm. And I completely lose it.
Oh, no.
And I'm like hysterically hyperventilating in the office when she's literally just asking me like, do you have general feelings of sadness?
Yeah.
And she didn't know what to do. Like, I think her training had not like brought her to the point where it was like, what do I do if someone like, actually answers yes to all these questions and they're not okay?
Help.
She was sort of like slowly backing out of the room.
Oh my God.
Look at the doctor now. Helpful. And I was like, and in that moment I was like, oh, I'm depressed. Because the thing about depression, so I am far more aware of my depression than I am my anxiety, because my depression, I'm sort of more friends with my depression. I think that I tend to have more depression than anxiety. I think I definitely have both, obviously. But, the thing about depression is that the worst part about depression is not knowing you're depressed, not knowing it is, quote, depression, right? Just knowing that you feel helpless, knowing that you feel all of these things, and knowing that there's this despair that you're constantly in, but unable to name it as this one thing for which you can actually get help, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like it's a trick. It's a real mind trick that it masks itself from you. And that it's like when suddenly someone says, oh, that's depression. And you go, oh my God,
Yeah.
Right. And that was
like
what
all the
happened.
puzzle pieces kind of fall
All the
together.
puzzle pieces come together.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my God, in the office. And then I was like hysterically crying. And then my doctor came in and was like, okay, so what are we going to do about this? And I was like, actually, I know exactly what I'm going to do about this. I need this medication. And I knew that the medication that I had taken for postpartum had been like a magic bullet for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, write me this prescription for this much.
Okay. I thought you were going to say like, let me go home and get out my Hitachi magic wand.
Yeah.
Might have helped for a little bit.
It might have helped. And, and with my experience with medication, because I have such an incredibly sensitive system, it was a magic bullet again. And I immediately I called all my friends. I think I told you this. I told a number of people. I was like, if I ever tell you that I want to go off medication, I want you to have an intervention with me.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't function. And I didn't realize how long I hadn't been functioning.
Yeah.
And and it was because my system is so sensitive, it took me 2 days. 2 days. The first day I slept, and the second day I woke up and it was like my light was turned back on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very unusual experience for people who take medication. Usually it takes a couple of weeks for their systems to process.
Yeah.
But I'm like a classic HSP, and my body just fully absorbs anything that it gets put into it, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's good for medication. It's bad because I can get over medicated. Like I can't wake up from anesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
It means I'm highly sensitive to caffeine. It means that I get hospitalized from maca root, like stupid things like that. Remember that?
Well, it's interesting about your experience with that. And I think yours is so common, is that I had the misconception that people with depression, just like the severity of it, like depression is people who can never get out of bed.
Yeah, right.
Which is sometimes true. For sure.
Right.
But what I had in my head was severe depression. People who can't get out of bed. They sleep, with all the curtains drawn. They never answer the phone. Like they're in complete isolation. And maybe I saw that in a movie somewhere, or probably.
It's like Camille.
Who's that?
She died of consumption or something. I don't know. It's high drama, basically.
I'm like, is that a friend of ours that I didn't know who that is?
No.
Shit, did I forget? Did I not send her a card?
Sorry about your consumption.
Does Hallmark make one of those?
Dear Camille.
But that's what I was talking about in the beginning of our conversation, is like, it's the high functioning depression. And I do think that it is something that that is a bullet that I have dodged. And it's interesting given that I am so much like my father, like I definitely got the anxiety,
right.
And so did my brother. But really neither of us, and I can't speak for him and shouldn't speak for him on this, but from what I can tell, both of us have dodged that bullet, and I'm thankful for it, but only experienced it in the depths of despair during my divorce, but that was very circumstantial and very understandable, what I was going through. Like nobody would have skipped through that and been like, it's not so bad. It was terrible. And I ended up walking through it. But when I did the whole 30, that was an experience that I've talked about it on the show. And I'll just briefly, I think I was on day 15 or something, and crying for 4 days in a row. God, I will never forget it. We had just moved into this house. I remember exactly where I was sitting, where I was like, I think that this is the third day in a row that I've woken up with this, and I couldn't shake it. It felt like those commercials with those little cartoons, and they're walking around and the cloud is just raining and following them around.
Yep.
It was this malaise that I could not shake, and it felt like it was all over my skin. Like I was like somebody had rubbed this lotion all over me that I couldn't get off, and I just wanted it off. I wanted my old self back, and I couldn't find her. Yep. And I was so incredibly sad for no reason. Nothing had changed in my life. There was no circumstance that would make me be sad. That was scarier than anything I think I've ever experienced, and also gave me such immeasurable compassion for people who struggle with that a lot.
Yep.
It's just terrible.
That was how I felt all the time. And when I got on medication, it was like the clouds parted. Literally, I was like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
It was night and day, like actually.
Yeah. For me, I just needed to start eating bread and
start eating
sugar again.
I know, which is crazy. And I know, because I was like, you're just detoxing, Andrea. You're just detoxing.
Well, and my naturopath said, she's like, first of all, I don't like the Whole30. She said, she just said she doesn't like it when people do it without support.
Yep.
And she said, she's like, I can't pinpoint what exactly triggered it, but she's like, it could have been your menstrual cycle. It could have been a number of things going on that she's like, I don't know. I would need to look at your blood work and hormones and all this stuff. And, but she just said, for some people, doing that kind of massive change to your diet can be like driving down the freeway and throwing your car in reverse.
Oh God. Right.
Just massive changes. And some people don't handle it well. And I just was one of those people. So
yeah. And it's crazy. And so what's really interesting is that I have the exact opposite. And I think it's because of my sensitivities and all of that was that, and I think getting back on medication was the beginning for me this last time, like almost 2 years ago. It was really the beginning of healing in so many ways for me, because once that was gone, I was able to heal so many other things. Right. I had, the year before I had bottomed out on my eating disorder stuff, which we have talked about on the podcast. Mm-hmm. Like 6 months after I got back on medication was when I got sober.
Yeah.
And I was able to get sober because I wasn't self-medicating, or I was self-medicating, but it was, I didn't need to, the medication was helping me in certain ways. And I was clear enough. I got clear enough to the point where I was like, I have to stop this. And then from quitting drinking, the more I cleared out, because I was getting back into a depressive cycle from the alcohol, and I was on medication and I was drinking, and I was not at that point where I was like, I have to choose my medication or my booze. I was like, the booze is completely counteracting everything that I'm doing. Alcohol is it's a depressant.
Mm-hmm.
And in reaction to filling your body with depressants, your body creates, cortisol and stress hormones. And so I was, the depression and anxiety cycle was really strong. And so when I quit drinking, I got myself off of that cycle. And then like the cleaner I get, the cleaner I have to get. Right. So, recently I gave up sugar again, and then I gave up gluten because I had so much physical chronic pain, right? And it's just been like a steady process. And all of these things for me, because my system is so hypersensitive, I have to, it's like a hair trigger, right? So I have to not have these things in order to maintain. I feel right now with my daily small dose of medication and not drinking and not eating sugar and not eating gluten, I feel at a very, very even energy and sort of happiness level.
Good.
And but any deviation will totally will throw me off. And so I just have to be super careful. And that to me is my level of self-care. And, that's just the deal. That's just sort of how I have to live now. And I'll tell you, my mental health is worth every bit of that at this point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Every, piece of bread that you've given up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, I believe you.
It's crazy because here's the thing, when I'm in chronic pain, I can't exercise. Right. So
it just becomes a cycle.
It just becomes this horrible cycle. And sugar and gluten were causing so much inflammation in my joints that I had chronic pain. And so then I couldn't go to the gym, and then my anxiety would start to cut, right. It's like,
yeah, just never ends.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you'll have a chuckle over this, but I've also noticed that my anxiety levels have all but diminished being in a relationship that doesn't cause me so much anxiety.
Oh my God. You don't say.
Being in a relationship where I trust my partner.
Oh my God, what a concept.
That made my anxiety go away.
Yep.
And it's not to say we're perfect by any stretch. Like, we have our problems, but and I've always said this from the beginning, one of the things that attracted me to Jason in the first place was I was like, he's so like drama free. Like,
He is. Like
he's just easy.
for better and worse, right? Like there
Right.
are positives to that. And then
there are some drawbacks.
There's some drawbacks,
but he just, again, it's just being in a relationship where we also both feel comfortable and trust one another, working on our problems together. Because that's anxiety inducing, but the level of it is massively less, knowing that, okay, I trust him enough that we're going to walk through this problem together.
Oh God,
it's going to be fine. It's going to be deeply uncomfortable in the interim, but it's going to be okay. And that has helped massively. And of course, I still have moments of circumstantial anxiety with my kids or with my business or whatever. But it is few and far between now where I wake up with it. The days that I do wake up with it, I know what it is. Sometimes it takes me a minute. Like sometimes it takes me like a good hour, after I've gotten up and I'm like, what is this feeling in my chest? And just this, I was like, okay, now here's what it is. And I get frustrated that it's there because I know it's going to hang out all day. And there's been a few times where I've had to cancel my whole day and just say, you know what, I can't, I have to move clients to a couple days later. And it really is, I'm not feeling well. I'm sick today. And that's what it is. And I just, what I have noticed is, and again, this is a conversation about shit that matters with unqualified people, not a, oh my gosh, tips and tools. But I will say this because I do think it'll be helpful for people, because the thing that I've learned is that the more I resist it and the more angry I get at it or at myself for having it, the more it likes to stick around and just fuck with me. But now where I'm just like, okay, I'm not happy you're here, but I'm just going to surrender to the fact that you are.
Yeah.
Then it just, if I can take a nap that day, I will. If I can limit my caffeine intake, I mean, obviously I can. I absolutely do that. And I just do what I can to take care of myself that day. I'll take a bath, I'll do these things. And it's interesting because it doesn't take over my day. Like it just sort of is like a dog that's like following you around and you're like, oh yeah, you're there. But it's not necessarily in the way. Yep. That's what my anxious days look like now.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll tell you that when mine comes up, it is all because, again, my crazy ass sensitivities, I can track mine with the full moon.
Oh, really? I probably could too. I just never have done it.
I was like, what is going on? And then I would look outside and be like, oh, that's weird. Huh. And then the next month, the same thing would happen. And I would look out and it was a full moon. I'm like, fucking A, if this is not completely tethered. And this last full moon almost did me in.
12/12 on 12/12.
Yep.
It
almost did me in. And I had so many friends who were the same way. Like I had dinner with some girlfriends last night and we were all three of us were talking about it. We were like, oh my God, it was so powerful and so intense. And I, as you know, Andrea, I'm like really not that woo. Like I am not this like, lunar, whatever. This is like not really my thing, although it's becoming more and more my thing. As I told you, like I taught myself tarot and like, everyone's like, who are you? But I start to notice these things. And of course, it makes sense scientifically, right? Like it controls, the full moon controls the oceans, the tides. We are 75% water. Right. Like it really does make sense. Right. And so I can look at that and be like, okay. And so now I can actually look at a lunar calendar and be like, okay, so this day is probably going to be a little funky and I can just look out for it and just, and do what you do, which is, just lie on the couch and zone out and just give myself the space to have the feelings that I'm having.
Yeah. And I know that, and I want to just point out too, like we have the luxury of working for ourselves that we can do that. And I know that that's not everybody's luxury. And there's probably a lot of single parents out there that just can't turn it off.
Right.
So what I would say to that is, and you can probably speak to this, being a single parent for so many years is reach out to people who care about you and just say like, I need some help for today.
Yep.
Can you do this for me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I talked to my son about it this year. On 12/12, he, and my son is like, I'm raising Alex P. Keaton. I don't know.
He's a Republican?
Where he came from. Well, he's not a Republican. Thank God.
Oh my God. You're the biggest feminist I know.
I know. what I'm raising is a debater. He is like, his personality type is the debater. And so he's just, he's taken tests, like he took like some tests and like came out that he was a libertarian. And I was like, I don't know where you came from. But it's actually, that was a phase. He's sort of come down off of that. But he's very pragmatic. He's very intellectual, pragmatic. He's like, that doesn't make sense. When he was like 3, I said something about feeling something in your heart. And he's like, Mom, you don't feel things with your heart. Your heart is an organ. It pumps blood. And I was like, oh,
True.
Right.
Well, for those people who don't know who Alex P. Keaton is, like just for some context,
oh God,
it was Family Ties. Well, I have a big younger audience too.
Yeah,
They run the gamut, but Family Ties was a family show where the parents were hippies from the 60s, got married and had kids, and one of their sons was a Republican. It was Michael J. Fox.
And he went to high school in a suit with a briefcase.
With a sweater vest.
And they were like, didn't they like meet at Woodstock or something? Or he was like conceived at Woodstock? Yeah. Like they were like,
exactly.
Well, how did this happen? And so that's basically me and my son. Like, I'm like, how did this happen? But he's like, super smart and all of the things. He's a great kid. But I talked to him about it this time. I was like, the moon is really powerful and look how beautiful she is. And we went outside and looked at it and he was like, wow, that is really powerful. That's really incredible. And he was like, but I mean, all this stuff about it, like you feeling it, like that's like bullshit, right, Mom? And I was like, well, and then I brought out the science about, the tides and the oceans and that we're mostly water. And he was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I was like, yeah. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you one way or the other.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I have loved this, and thank you so much. And this has been a long time coming, this episode, and I appreciate your being candid and honest and open and talking about all the things, anxiety and depression in your life. And thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about this too. I think like these are these conversations that we, you and I have had over the years. And I think it's just so important to talk about it and to be upfront about it for sure. Yeah. I'm glad that especially women I should say are, more people, but especially women that are younger than us. I think that the millennial generation is talking about mental health so much more than we did. Oh my God. And thank God. Thank God. Thank God. Thank God for them. Thank all of you. Really, for real. I think millennials get such a bad rap and people say, I think you guys are awesome. I do too. I think there's so many great things that they are just not tolerating in terms of, biases with sexuality and people and mental health. Just so much great stuff. Y'all are going to change the world for real. Yes. Let's hope so, because I am tired. Yeah. Gen Xers are tired. We are so tired. Yeah. We are so tired. Thank you. Exactly. Oh God. Anyway. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I know how important and valuable your time is. So I thank you for joining me every week. And until next time, I will see you all out in cyberspace. Bye-bye.